This pandemic isn't over. Today, we mark a tragic milestone here in the United States. 1 million COVID deaths. 1 million empty chairs around the family dinner table. We're at a new stage in fighting this pandemic, facing an evolving set of challenges. We have to double down on our efforts to get shots in people's arms, country by country, community by community.
That was President Biden Thursday at the second global COVID-19 summit. The president encouraging world leaders to step up their commitment to combating COVID-19 while also calling on Congress to provide funding for tests, vaccines, and treatments. It comes as the White House COVID coordinator is issuing a dire warning that, quote, Americans' immune protection from the virus is waning. The virus is adapting to be more contagious, and booster doses for most people will be necessary, with the potential for enhanced protection from a new generation of shots. And joining me now to discuss, Kristin Urquiza. She's the co-founder of Marked by COVID, an organization aimed at providing accurate, science-based information and amplifying the voices of those most impacted by COVID-19. And Kristin, you tweeted something that struck me. 1 million lives lost, and tonight happens to be the weekly Marked by COVID community meeting. If you want to be around others who know, number one, this is preventable. Number two, the pandemic is not over. And number three, our losses must be recognized. This is your space. I mean, how are you processing the fact that 1 million Americans have died?
I don't even know how I'm processing. I'm worried right now that there's not enough processing going around in our country. The announcement yesterday by the president was just a blip in comparison to what really is needed for all of us to recognize the horrific loss of lives that we have gone through. And, I fear that what we are getting from our leaders from the top down is just thoughts and prayers. And we need action now to not only remember those that we've already lost, but prevent other preventable deaths.
When we talk about millions of Americans dying, I think that when it's a number this large, it's hard to really put it into real terms and to talk about it as if these are real people and real families, because it's not just the million people who have died, but that's 1 million families that have been impacted by grief and the loss of a loved one, and they'll never be the same. So how should the rest of us recognize the gravity of the losses American families have experienced in this pandemic, I mean, including your own, and how do we start talking about this and getting out of this habit of thinking we can go back to normal? You can't go back to before the pandemic.
Thanks so much for asking that question. And it's the question that we need to be asking ourselves right in this moment. Do we want to normalize mass death, or do we want to actually build bridges of empathy? Another way to think about it is, what would you do if overnight the city of San Jose, California disappeared and everyone in it? I think we would all be shocked, horrified. We'd reach out to those around us who we knew had loved ones in San Jose, California, and said, what can we do? What happened? And then we would demand answers from our leaders of how could this have happened? That's the exact same approach that we need to take to this slow-moving disaster. 1 million people is akin to the 11th largest city in the United States. And the thing that makes this so infuriating to people who have lost loved ones is that we know most of these deaths along the entire way were preventable. And we're not doing enough to slow the spread right now to keep our most vulnerable populations safe. In January and February, 42% of people who passed were vaccinated. And that's not because vaccines don't work. That's because the immunocompromised, the elderly, people who are recovering from cancer are succumbing to severe COVID. If that doesn't shake you to your core, you're not paying attention.
I mean, what's your message in the last minute here for other families like yours who are trying to process this grief in a world where everybody thinks this pandemic is over?
I mean, the gaslighting has been really hard. It's easy to doubt oneself. But that's why I send that message out on social media. Marked by COVID is a community that is of folks who know that these losses were real, that they were profound, and that if we continue to share our stories, we can hold our elected officials, old ones and new ones, to account, to not only recognize our losses and prevent this from happening again, but to make movement on things like the WTO TRIPS waiver and getting vaccines around the world, to bringing up the issue of what are we doing to prevent this in the first place from spillover events from zoonosis. Our stories are the power behind really bringing that sort of real life urgency to making the social change happen. So join us at Marked by COVID.
Kristin Urquiza, thank you so much for being here. I'm so sorry for your loss. Please stay safe.